Hey everybody, it's the Knitting Professor, and today I wanted to address the topic of why we travel in the context of knitting, and I ran across this article. I read the AARP magazine religiously. I've been a member of the AARP for quite a while now. You'd think that I was, going on 80 or something like that, but actually you can be a member, I think start with age 50 or something like that, and the articles are always really good. But this is Rick Steves. A lot of you probably recognize him. I tried to replace his globe with a skein of yarn. I don't think it worked very well, but the title is "The Mark of Good Travel is to Experience Culture Shock," and I've done my fair share of that. I've had some really interesting travel experiences, especially when I was younger. Behind the Iron Curtain, which for an American who was raised loving capitalism and all the good stuff was a little daring. So I think I can go on record as having experienced culture shock, but I kind of changed the title to say that the goal of the mark of good travel is to experience yarn. So it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but then again, maybe it's not. And I think, when I was younger, the first time I went abroad was when I was 19. I felt obligated to learn as much as I could about the culture. I got to do a little knitting, right? I felt obligated every time. Well, number one, I felt obligated to go to every museum. And then when I was in the museum, I felt obligated to look at every exhibit. And for years I did this. Of course, a lot of my travel experience within the context of college education. So I was obviously a language major, and one of the heroes back in the 70s, some of you who are maybe my vintage will recall Paul Simon, who was a senator from Illinois. And he won awards for his language study advocacy. And of course, there are all kinds of reasons for that had to do with the Cold War, but they also had a lot to do with international understanding and cultivating friendships across borders, which I think is obviously is crucial. You may or may not know this, but 20 or so years ago, maybe 30, the deterioration of the ozone layer was this huge issue that people were concerned about. You don't hear about that anymore because guess what? Because of international cooperation, it's been resolved. And obviously there is a distant hope that the scourge of climate change could be addressed through international cooperation. Of course, we can't cooperate internationally if people don't, cross borders and get to know each other. I hate to put it as kind of a running joke, but, my kids grew up in South Dakota, and they have a surprising number of friends who have never left the state and who have hardly left the city. And, of course, those are probably, statistically, the people who are most likely to be, like climate change deniers, to follow conspiracy theories, and to seek authoritarian leaders because their minds are closed, more or less, right? And I've seen teachers go out of their way to promote travel among young people in particular because it has such a profound influence on their development. And of course, my kids, I always did my best, even with my limited means as a single mother, to get them out of state and to get them out of the country. I have one kid who still hasn't been out of the country, but I think that will probably change pretty soon. So I hope so. But in any case, I'm going to Sweden in August. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is because I'm always wanting to experience. I don't know about culture shock necessarily. It's not like I shouldn't experience that. I probably should. Some of you have encouraged me to go to Istanbul, and I'm actually seriously considering that. I do believe it would be great for me to go to Istanbul. But I've never been to Sweden. I would like to learn some of the language. I thoroughly enjoyed going to Norway. And I no longer have this compulsion when I'm going to a different country, a different city, to absorb a maximum amount of culture or go to every exhibit in every museum. There are certain museums I'm going to prioritize. And if you know Stockholm and you know, for example, of a crafting type museum or a fiber museum, I would love to know where I should go. There is a Skansen there, and I'm very excited to see that because I love to see exhibits of rural life. Architecture is one of my favorite things that I used to do going to Hungary many times. And because I really, especially am drawn to peasant culture, agrarian life, and a kind of a life that eschewed a lot of the trappings of big cities, which, I've experienced plenty of those too. I've lived in Paris, I've lived in Philadelphia. But I really like, maybe you could say I have a romantic attraction for this idea of being close to the earth. And in a way that doesn't necessarily commodify it, which is hard to find nowadays because of enclosures. So in any case, the question is now, why am I traveling? What do I expect to find when I get there? What am I looking for? And every time I talk to my kids about, well, I'd like to go to this or that place, and they're like, well, I'd like to go here, and I'm like, that'd be interesting. And so my first question is, what kind of yarn stores do they have? What kind of yarn stores do they have? So I have obviously an addiction, but on the other hand, it's a love, it's a hobby, it's a passion for crafting. I want to learn more about the yarn business in other countries, about how yarn crafting, fiber crafting unfolds in other countries. I'm obviously writing, I would say, to an international audience because I have a family from Norway in my novel, and I have characters from other countries. I have a person from the Czech Republic, for example. I have a person with Indian and Pakistani roots. So I have an international outlook. And I think it just makes the whole narrative more interesting and more revelatory. And arguably more relevant in this day and age. So one of the things that I like to do is to go to yarn stores. And then when I come back and I have the yarn in my bag, I have memories that I associate with it. For example, this spin cycle yarn that I got recently in Toronto was given to me as a gift. And I can remember the person who gave it to me and the circumstances in which I got it. And when I knit up my hat with it, which is my plan, I'll be able to wear the hat and I'll be able to associate that with those memories. Here is a pair of socks that I knit. This is yarn that I bought in Budapest in 2017. When I went there with my younger son, it was just he and I, and we just tooled around. And again, it was important to me to expose my children to other countries where they speak other languages. Not everyone in the world speaks English. And, it's hard to really grasp that when you don't experience it, when you're not surrounded by people who speak a language that you have no way of understanding. So I have a lot of memories of being in Hungary with him and buying this yarn. In fact, I started knitting these socks. I can picture the Airbnb, the apartment where we were, the sofa, the living room, everything. My Disney rash that I got because we were walking around so much. And now when I wear these socks, the first thing that comes to mind is, ooh, got this yarn in Budapest. It's German yarn, by the way. Here's another one. So this sweater is from yarn that I bought in Trondheim. And I can picture the person who sold me the yarn. She was so helpful. She was so kind and informative. And of course, I'm writing about a yarn store that transforms itself over and over again in my novels. And when I go to international yarn shops, I get more and more ideas for how that transformation could unfold. Because, we have certain ideas about yarn stores in this country. There's certain ideas about yarn stores in other countries. And there's certain ideas about yarn stores, especially in Scandinavia. So I'm actually very eager to see the yarn stores in Sweden. One of you responded to my German video where I sort of addressed a similar topic and gave me a tip on a store to go to, which I sincerely appreciate. I plan to head there. But yeah, so I remember buying this yarn. I remember the conversation I had with the woman who sold it to me. I even have vague memories of the other people who were in the store, just the whole experience of being in Trondheim and how magical it was. And every time I wear this sweater, it's like a walking souvenir of that time. In fact, this book I bought there too. I can remember the bookstore where I found it. I can remember the shelf. And every time I, do a pattern out of this book, those memories will resurface. And they're pretty fond memories. Here's some yarn that I got in Copenhagen. And again, it was gifted to me by the yarn store owner who was happy to have me in there, express interest in videotaping their store. And as soon as I make a hat, which is my plan with this yarn, I'll be able to wear the hat. And I'll enjoy those memories. And this yarn I bought in Montreal, and I went to Les Garçons, and those guys were just so kind and so gracious and so tolerant of I was practically like starstruck because I'd seen their videos, and they're just so adorable. And this yarn is gorgeous. Again, I might make a hat, might make a scarf, some kind of an accessory. I really love the colors. There's just a little bit of a pinkish hue to this brown and lavender tan. So that's, what else are you going to take home, right? You can take home souvenirs, right? You can take home t-shirts. I asked my daughter, I say, what do you want when I go to Stockholm? She's like, a keychain. That's what she likes. So hopefully I'll get her over there. The last time she was abroad, it was in Scotland, which I have not been to yet. But here's another example of addressing this question of what do we get out of travel. So as you know, I have a blind protagonist in my novels, and I'm writing the 4th volume where she is a featured person. So I follow a lot of blind content creators, including Molly Burke. And it just seems like some kind of a serendipity to this whole topic. She was in Vienna, and she posted on her Facebook, probably Instagram too, about how she travels as a blind person, what she gets out of it. Because, you run across people who are like, oh, what business does a blind person have in traveling? What in the heck can they get out of it? Because sighted people have no conception of, what you can gain from a life where you do not have that particular sense. But you just have all the other ones that you can enjoy, right? So she did this lovely video about how she was trying on clothes in some fashion salon in Vienna. And it was beautifully done. She was trying on multiple outfits, and she was going through how it's a very accessible way to access culture when she's abroad. Because if she goes into a museum, she has to painstakingly ask what accommodations they have, what accessible exhibits they have. And oftentimes there's not a lot. We're such an ocular-centric society. But so she was talking about how she was trying on clothes and fashion and asking about the fashion trends in Vienna. And she was feeling the textures of the fabric, and she was feeling the construction of the garments, and she was trying them on, and she was feeling them against her body. And it was a very tactile, very concrete way to experience culture as a blind person. Because obviously, when you go into an art museum, there's not a heck of a lot you can do, because guess what? The way art is portrayed in museums tends to be, it's all about seeing, right? It's all as though that was the only way that you could access art was with your eyes. And it's, I've done a lot of research over the years about how we interact with land, how we interact with the earth. In traditional societies, the interaction with the earth was very much, it was tactual. It was like holding the soil, studying the soil, touching the plants, the wool, the animals, smelling, being just really in touch with the earth. But then you have the enclosure movement, and you have Robinson Crusoe, and it's all about vision and how a person can stand at a distance, look at a landscape, and imagine the grid and how they can transform it into a vehicle of commodification and profit maximization. So why do we privilege sight so much? It's like this bad habit. And I have a friend of mine who's blind, lives in Sioux Falls. He's asked me to donate money to an exhibit, which I plan to do, which is 3D realizations of famous art to make a greater space for blind and visually impaired clients to go to the art museum. And I think that's a good start. But we're still, even when we're doing that, we're privileging the visual arts, and we're saying, well, here's this watered down version that you can access as a blind person. Well, what about art that from the start is not just for the eye, right? So that's a question that really, really interests me in conjunction, gotta find the right words, with my prose, with my novels, and having a blind character who knits, because I believe there is room for the fiber arts, to play a much bigger role in the development, the conceptualizing, and creation of art that is accessed by touch. Now, it's still the case that in a lot of fiber art exhibits, you can only look. But my dream is a museum where you could have fiber art on display that, like clothing, is literally designed to be worn out, that is designed to be handled, to be touched, to be tactually inspected, taken in, maybe even consumed. So this is my vision, and I was just really glad to see Molly Burke post about how she accesses other cultures, other countries, with pursuing fashion. And in a sense, you could say that as someone who loves yarn and knitting, that to a degree, I mean, obviously I'm a sight person, I can enjoy art that's made for the eyes, but to a degree I use yarn also, but yarn and fiber and yarn stores and the people in the stores to access the local culture. For example, I remember being in Copenhagen, actually this was in Trondheim, and asking about how spinning was practiced there. And the answer I got was intriguing because it was a lot different from the situation in the United States. The United States, spinning has become, I would say, pretty popular. And even stores that more or less only have yarn, you can still find some fiber to spin there. So it's like, it's touched the yarn industry in the United States to a potent level. Whereas what I was told, anyhow, this one yarn store in Trondheim, was that spinning was very much on the margins of the fiber crafting community. And, you know, it's just one person's opinion, right? If you know something that this person doesn't, let me know. But I think as far as really just accessing culture and traveling and experiencing whatever this is, you know, hugging the globe, hugging the yarn, whatever, hugging other cultures, other languages, other societies, that in the era that we are in, number one, international collaboration is more necessary than other. And obviously, the United States is doing a piss poor job right now of modeling that, and I do foresee that as changing. I have hope that this is just a passing, unfortunate fad, this phase that we're in. But in the meantime, Europe and the European Union are collaborating among themselves and with other countries to enact really wide-ranging solutions to the scourge of climate change. And so, you know, when I'm over there, I'm probably going to ask some people about, you know, what's up with that? What are you guys doing? And what can I bring back to the U.S. to, you know, the voters that I have contact with around here? Because I have a lot of contact with a lot of young people. And in the United States, it's hard for young people to vote. In the last election, of my 3 kids, only 1 voted. Because the others ran across roadblocks, which is ridiculous, right? But that's the plan, right? That's the strategy that is used to make it hard for certain groups of people to vote, so that certain other people's votes weigh more. So I figure the more that I can learn from other people in other countries about what they're doing right, the better. And I think that's a good thing for everyone to consider doing. And another thing that I, you know, would remind my students, remind my children, is that there's going to come a time within their lifetime, probably, when climate migration is real. And we already talk about that in the United States. There's certain areas where, you know, you can't even hardly get insurance for your house anymore, because the likelihood that's going to get burned out or flooded out is increasingly great. And so there are certain areas, like the areas around the Great Lakes, where people are looking on them as, well, that's a climate haven. And that, it's like a moving target, right? Those things keep changing, because one area that you say, oh, it's not going to burn, well, it might flood. Or another area that has been flooding a lot, people get chased out, and then they want to go to some place that's dry. And then, well, the aquifers are drained. So climate migration is going to become a kind of a critical issue, unfortunately. And that is all the more reason for me, for example, to encourage my children, go learn another language, experience other cultures, become the type of person who is nimble, who is adaptable, who can make friends with different, diverse groups of people, because you never know when you might be dependent on them, right? We can't just stay in our little bubbles and our little groups and just stay isolated. Isolationism, I think, is it's dead. We could pretend that it still works, if you have the power to pretend that, but it's not going to work. And even if it works for, say, me, will it work for my children? I don't think so. Yeah. So I think that's just one more reason why I don't care why I travel, I'm going to travel. And I no longer have this sort of anal urge to go to every museum and see every exhibit like I did when I was 20. But even if I emphasize the pleasure of yarn, and I'm going to add to that the pleasure of gardens, I love gardens, I'm still going to experience the people, the food, the language, the pursuits, the thinking of people in other countries. And I've never been to Sweden before, so I'm excited to go to a new country. And I think I should start planning that trip to Istanbul, really. Maybe I should combine, so I should put a little plus sign here. The mark of good travel is to experience culture shock and yarn. So for the upcoming trip, emphasis is going to be on yarn, but maybe the one after that, especially if I get one of my kids to go with me, I'll add a little more culture shock. Kind of like what I did when I first set foot in Budapest in February of 1980, when it was behind the Iron Curtain, and I didn't know word one of Hungarian. I was just curious. So, yeah, I think that's a good spirit, and I'll try to keep y'all posted on the yarn I buy, the people I meet at the yarn stores, and maybe some other tidbits. This is, after all, a knitting channel. But that doesn't mean I can't throw in something about the fika, afternoon coffee, that the Swedes enjoy, and the gardens that I go to, and probably also the Skansen. So if you have some suggestions, if you're from Stockholm or you've been there and you know the yarn stores, or you know like the top sites that I should go to, I was sort of amazed when I went to Copenhagen and I went to this one castle, which I'd have to remember the name of it, but it had incredible tapestries. I mean, tapestries that were just mind-boggling, that were commissioned by the royal government of Denmark. And I was just bowled over. So there are probably fiber-related things that I can find in the castles, in the art museums, and things that will blow my mind and expand my horizons, even as I write my knitting novels. So if you know something I don't that lines up with that, let me know. And with that, I will see you soon, and I hope y'all have a great weekend. Ciao.